So I kind of handle it more as I think about interviewing an employee, and I want to understand, do you have some humility? Do you understand that this is going to be a two-way partnership? Are you willing to work through that with us?
This is You Should Talk To, a podcast for busy marketing leaders who are looking for support and tips on getting shit done. In each episode, Daniel Weiner interviews marketing leaders and discusses their experience, successes, and failures around hiring agencies. If you're interested in finding and choosing the right agency partner, then let's jump in.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the You Should Talk To podcast. I am Daniel Weiner, and this podcast is brought to you by myself, as well as You Should Talk To. We're going to get our big sponsor one of these days. You Should Talk To pairs brands and marketers for free with vetted agencies and or freelancers for pretty much any marketing or tech need. Why? Because finding great agencies is a giant pain in the ass. I am super excited to be joined by a LinkedIn legend, a member of my board, Leigh Chesley, Chief Customer Officer at Longbow Advantage. Leigh, thank you so much for joining.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the awesome intro. Hopefully I can live up to that.
I was going to say, where are you calling in from today? You're all over, usually. Where are you right now?
I am home in Nashville, just outside of Nashville today, so it's a great day to be home.
Nice. You've been traveling all over the place from what I understand. But outside of your travel, you've had some really interesting work experience over the years in partnerships, marketing. You now have the big fancy C-suite title. Give us the Cliffs Notes. How'd you get here?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that the other day, that my path seems like I've jumped into some different things over the course of my career. I think most of it is just as you know, I say yes to anything. So
I do know that.
So someone says, hey, you want to try this new thing? I tend to say yes without thinking about it, which most of the time works out pretty well. You can at least figure it out after the fact. And so I think the reason at the end of the day I've really jumped around is I've never felt like I needed to have a defined career path. You know, I started out in marketing and I knew I liked it, but I also knew that there's a lot of other flavors in the world that I'd want to try. And I never wanted to say, you know what, I want to go CMO route. And I just wanted to learn a lot about different things. And so I've just kind of said yes as different opportunities have popped up. And that's, I think, how I've gotten here today.
And what's Longbow Advantage? Fill us in on that.
Yeah, we are a supply chain consulting and software company. So what that actually means is we do consulting for warehouse logistics teams, folks who are buying warehouse management solutions. We'll go in and help them implement or help them strategize or both. And then we also have our own SaaS product that is warehouse visibility that kind of pulls together all of the data across all the platforms and in the warehouse or multiple warehouses and provides real-time data and visibility to folks across the network.
Nice. Sounds very fancy. And as Chief Customer Officer, what's the biggest nuance in the title? I'd argue like most marketing roles should be customer focused, but is there any difference? I know you owned marketing at some point. Now you have that title. Is there some nuance to it in terms of like ownership and what you're working on?
Yeah, it's different than what most Chief Customer Officer titles mean. And it was one of those situations where we kind of had some gaps in ownership at the company. And I was talking with my CEO and said, you know, I'd love to take on X, Y, and Z. And he said, cool, great, would love for you to do that. Tell me what we should call you. And so what X, Y, and Z entails is essentially the entire customer journey outside of like core sales. So my team's responsible for business development, marketing, success support, and professional services. So when we say customer experience, my team's responsible for the customer experience. It really is end-to-end customer experience. And then that sales enablement piece kind of pulls it all together. So I would say that's the biggest nuance when you're thinking about on the marketing side. The marketing team now has access to the customer and content and experience in ways that I personally, as a marketer, have never had before. And then on the customer team's side, when you think about support and success and services and things like that, they have access to the marketing team, where the marketing team typically, historically, has been very focused on net new revenue generation, which is could be a whole nother podcast on why I think that's maybe not the best practice. And so
You should start a podcast.
I have a lot to say on that. You could be my first guest.
Perfect.
And so they have access to the marketing team. So when you think about expansion and retention and things like that, we're much more aligned than any other company I've ever been involved in before.
That's fantastic. Not many people can say that and actually mean it, so that's good to hear.
Yeah.
Did it take some time to get there, I presume, in that sort of setup?
It did and it didn't. I mean, being the leader of, I call it the 3 pillars. So my 3 pillars of my team are marketing, customer success, and services. So kind of being the leader that unifies those makes it really easy because there's no silos, right? Everyone has access to everyone. On the flip side, I think helping people across the teams understand what these resources that they now have access to can do to help them, in their jobs, that's been, I would say, maybe the hardest thing to an extent. But, we're a 20-year-old company, but we're very startup, I would say, minded when it comes to how we operate. And so we've also moved quickly with getting processes into place and getting SOPs and communication, breaking down communication barriers. And so we're about 6-7 months into that journey, and I think we're at a good place. And I think in 6 more months, we'll be at a great place.
Gotcha. And you've worked with some huge global brands. You work with smaller brands. What's your overall opinion on agencies? They get a bad rep sometimes. Are you in the love them or hate them camp overall if you had to pick?
Well, I think they do. I mean, they do obviously get a bad rap sometimes. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here having this conversation. But I think on the brand side, I think there needs to be some ownership in that conversation as well of, did you pick the right agency? Did you lay out, the right goals? Did you talk clearly about maybe what some of the roadblocks the agency's going to run into with your company are when you were first initiating that conversation? I think all of those things are really important. And I think it's easy a lot of times on the brand side to just point out what's going wrong and put the blame on the agency. But I'm a big believer with a vendor relationship. It's a two-way relationship. It's a two-way conversation. And so I think we, as the internal owner of that relationship, have to take responsibility when something goes wrong. So yes, are there agencies out there who, maybe you wouldn't recommend to a colleague? Of course, but I don't think it's probably as often as marketers might like to say.
No, that's definitely fair. It's definitely a two-way street. I'd argue that also, AI wouldn't have a company if there weren't bad agencies. Right. But bad agencies make, or bad experiences, I should say, make the good ones shine through even more and kind of make you realize how much better things can be. So that's why I always encourage, even when people are in happy relationships, to revisit them and, explore outside just to gain a different perspective of what's out there.
Yeah. I mean, you never know what having another conversation is going to teach you about what you should be doing, how you should be thinking about things. So I think that's great advice too.
Yeah, I ask everybody this question in an attempt to not trigger them, but are you getting hit up every 12 seconds by vendors and agencies alike on LinkedIn, email, phone? Or does it slow down a little in the C-suite?
No, it hasn't slowed down. I hate to say this, and my, I talk to my biz dev team and I'll send them examples of what not to do. And I hate to say that, but we get hit up a ton. And I'm seeing a lot of tactics of, we're on a journey, I would say, with our digital strategy. And we know that we have a lot of improving to do. We have a lot of opportunity. But I get a lot of emails where people will send their strategy as, hey, what you're doing sucks. And
they tell you your baby's ugly.
Yeah. And let me tell you how I would do it better. And that's the first email you get. And I've had that quite a few times in the last year, and it's just so off-putting. And I don't understand why people think that tactic would work, but it must at times, right?
I don't know, truthfully. I get hit up with so many things that sometimes I'm like, if they're still sending it, it must work. But I'm like, how does that work? There's no way that anybody replied to that in a positive way. So I don't know. I mean, I get such horrific outreach. Once I change my title to founder, I think everybody just assumes you're spending millions of dollars or something like that. I'm not sure. So yeah, I get it just as much as everybody else, I imagine.
Yeah. I had someone the other day tell me, And someone else got this LinkedIn message too, because we were having a conversation. They said, oh my gosh, I got the same one that said, I hadn't been responding to them on LinkedIn because it was not great inbound. And they said, if I wanted to be ignored, I would have stayed with my ex-girlfriend. Like, that was how the next message started. And
Did you write back, I see why they broke up with you now?
I was really close to responding, and I was talking to someone in biz dev, and they said, no, it's a pattern. They're trying to get you to break out of your pattern and actually respond. So don't do it. Like, don't take the bait. Like, oh my God.
That's why. Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's. I try to, when I get stuff, I'm like, it's not this person, it's leadership. Somebody told them to send this message, or this was okay, or this was approved. So I try not to get too grumpy with folks. To that end, like, what's the biggest difference from taking a leap from VP to the C-suite? Talk to a lot of people about that, and it's typically like board and ownership and stuff like that. What have you seen being kind of the biggest change in your day-to-day?
Well, I mean, there's the obvious stuff of, I would say, more direct ownership towards revenue and goals and things like that. I think that kind of goes without saying. For me, the day-to-day difference has been, now I am leading really strong directors, and I am leading folks who own very different areas of the business, and who have teams ranging from like 6 to 20 people. And so feeling at times somewhat disconnected from the day-to-day. I've never been this far removed from what's happening just like in the weeds, and having to get comfortable with that has been really different. Knowing that because they're strong leaders, they're not going to involve me in every meeting or I'm not going to be copied on every email. They're going to throw a flag when they need something, which is exactly what they should be doing, right? And getting comfortable with kind of, I would say, changing the way we communicate. That's definitely been different. And then, I know that with Pavilion, this is a big concept and something I've reframed probably a year and a half ago when I joined, but the concept of first team, where your first team is the executive leadership team. And yes, my job with my team is to break down barriers and over communicate and support and make sure that they can do their job. And that is what I'm doing every day. But my job really is accountability to the leadership team and accountability to the company in a different way. And so kind of balancing and figuring those things out, just as, this is my first time in a C-suite role. So it's, all of those nuances are just extremely different. So that has been the biggest change for me, because in marketing, you're always preparing board decks and thinking about board meetings, even if you're involved or not, and you had revenue responsibility. And so like that was, I think that I just transitioned into that pretty naturally. I think it's the other things that the soft skills you can't really prepare for, that I've had to be really cognizant of how I'm responding to things and how I'm supporting my team differently now that I'm managing really, really strong senior leaders.
Sounds like self-awareness is a big skill required to do what you're doing.
Let's hope I have it. I guess we'll find out, right?
I guess we'll have you on for a follow-up. If not, I imagine.
Yeah.
Before finding me, of course, and now you would only use You Should Talk To, but prior, when you needed to outsource, where were you typically beginning your search when you needed vendor, agency, anything? And you also mentioned Pavilion. I had Kathleen Booth on recently, who's the new SVP of community there, or SVP of marketing there. And she had kind of a viral-ish post on LinkedIn that I really resonated with. That community is the new Google, and no longer people really at least starting their search on Google. Is that the same for you? Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Am I going to do my due diligence and Google for, if it were an agency and I wanted them specific to, we're a Canadian company, if I wanted them specific to Montreal, am I going to go on Google and Google agencies in Montreal and do some due diligence there? Yes, of course. But it is community. It's, getting recommendations from previous colleagues, talking to people on my team. Hey, who have you worked with in the past that you really liked, that you've had good experiences with? 9 times out of 10, well, I would say probably 10 times out of 10, I'm going to talk to those agencies before I'm going to go find some random agency from Google. And then you get to the point that you ask for a recommendation. We all know how that works. They're going to give you their favorite customer. They're going to sing your praises. Maybe they've been, teed up to say certain things. So I think I I totally agree. I can't remember the last time I started a relationship with a vendor that wasn't recommended by somebody who had worked with them in the past.
That's why I think it's so funny that people talk about dark social. Like, it's like this, well, I don't know, maybe controversial or unpopular. It's like this new thing. I'm like, I mean, it's been going on for, you just put a name on it. Like, it's been around.
Yeah, it makes it sound kind of like Marvel superhero-ish, I think. Like, oh, people are doing dark social. It's like, isn't that was that social selling 7 years ago? Is like
Just word of mouth. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if we need to call it that. You also talk too, I think it's hysterical. I've been working on a post about this for LinkedIn that I couldn't think of how to say it in like a non-asshole way. But like when you ask, I just think it's funny. Like when you ask any vendor for references, you're wasting your time. Like, what are they going to do? Send you the people who have terrible things to say about them? Of course, they're rightfully so teeing up to those people. Hey, this person's going to call you and talk to you. And like, it'd be great if you touched on these 3 very specific things. There's definitely a better way of like backtracking stuff. But yeah, I just think I do have several companies who like, after I make introductions, I don't think it's a bad thing, but I guess I just don't know what they expect to hear that's going to, like, what could somebody say or would they say that they'd be like, oh, God, we're never going to work with them now.
Right.
When they're getting it from the agency. So
I guess the only red flag would be if you can't give me a reference. That would be telling, right?
that would be weird. Yeah. That would be a good reason to not hire someone. If they can't come up with one, that's definitely a red flag.
Yeah, which stinks for newer agencies, but that's kind of the way it is, I guess.
There's always a way to fudge those things. Everybody's got some sort of person they can send somebody. Send them your mom, send them a family member. They'll say nice things about you. When you're having those conversations, what are you typically looking for from an agency or a vendor? What's important to you?
Communication. So I'm going to ask questions around, I'll ask questions around their capabilities and the folks that they have on the team and, things like that, kind of your standard questions, right? I think some of those can kind of be bullshit too. Like hey, if I'm looking and I'm like super interested in ABM, you're going to tell me that you have a team of ABM rock stars. If community is really important, we're going to focus on that. So I think, that's kind of fluff too, but I'm going to ask about communication if we hit a roadblock, because we're probably going to have something we don't agree on, or how are you going to handle that? Tell me about a brand that you lost. What went wrong there? So I kind of handle it more as I think about interviewing an employee, and I want to understand, do you have some humility? Do you understand that this is going to be a 2-way partnership? Are you willing to work through that with us? Because I'm going to respectfully tell you if something didn't go the way that we feel like it should have, because I want to have that conversation. I want longevity in a partnership. So is it the kind of culture that thrives in those sorts of relationship, or is it a culture that's like super scrappy and building really quickly and just kind of needs to get things done, and maybe they're seeing more attrition, or they don't, they haven't built up great relationships? I think those are the things that are more telltale, because in my experience, if I've worked with a great agency and we're trying to pivot our strategy and maybe they don't have the right people to support it, like they've gone out and hired people, right? Like you can fix a lot of problems. I think one of the only ones you can't fix is the culture of how you're working together.
Yeah, that's actually an excellent question to ask. And I would say it's a red flag if you ask, tell me about like a negative situation you've had with a client and how it went. And they said, oh, we've never had a negative situation with a client or something like that. I'd argue that's a red flag. But yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. I think like one of my more hot takes is, the work doesn't matter. And what I mean by that is you don't get to do the work if you don't do the stuff up front in terms of like communication and relationship really well. So even though a piece of me dies, every time someone says rock star, say you have, let's just assume you've got the smartest, most capable team in the world. If you suck at communication, or you suck at presenting yourselves and like digging in and answering the questions that are important to the client, you don't get to do any of that stuff and showcase the brilliant people on your side. And I think a lot of agencies forget the business they're in a little bit sometimes, which is relationships. You as a product get to do the work at the end of the day of what you specialize in, I'd say.
Yeah. I mean, I actually posted, this is really nice, not to plug my own LinkedIn, but I
plug it, Leigh.
I have zero strategy. I'm not looking for followers, but I posted something on LinkedIn over the weekend about how my family and I were in Universal Orlando last week, and we did a VIP behind the scenes tour, and it's not a private tour. So you're paired with like 3 other families, whatever makes 12, right? You're paired with those people. And we ended up with people aged 8 years old to probably in their 60s. And everyone wanted to do different things, right? Like me and my husband are in our 30s. We have a 16-year-old son. Like, we're wanting to get on Velociraptor and Hagrid and Hulk and all these things. And these 8-year-olds are like, can we get on Minions, right?
Yeah.
And our guide had his work cut out for him. And in the beginning, he basically said, I get that you all want like X experience. I want to make that happen for you. That's my primary goal. You're not all going to get to do everything that you want to do, but here's what I will do. I will make sure we do X, Y, and Z. I will tell you how to come back around later or tomorrow or whatever and like give you the hacks on how to do the things that we didn't get to. I'll communicate like early and often. And like, he set the stage for the experience. He set the right expectations. He did an awesome job. I don't think anyone got to do everything they wanted. And we paid a good bit of money for this, right? We all left like 12 out of 10. Like, this was the best experience ever. It was about communication. And that's really what it all boiled down to. And I think it was just such a great example for, had he communicated poorly and set the wrong expectations, we all would have had a horrible day.
Maybe Disney will sponsor this after this conversation. Wouldn't that be nice?
Maybe I'll get a call from someone down in Orlando wanting like to sponsor me. That'd be great.
I was gonna say, steal the thunder. I hope you get 1 million followers after this podcast. I've seen a big shift, especially since COVID, of mostly bigger brands. It was kind of, I think, already there with smaller brands, but bigger brands moving towards smaller independent agencies that are specialized in like 1 to 3 things, but more like 1 to 2, I would say. What do you think of that? Regardless of where you're at, are you looking more for like specialization? Do you have an opinion of like a full service quote unquote agency?
I would say I'm in that camp. In my experience, I mean, I'm sure they're out there, but I've not had great luck finding agencies that are great at everything. And I think it can sound wonderful to have one agency you go to have to communicate strategy one time or, 1 time a week or whatever that cadence looks like. I think it sounds like the fairy tale, but I think something always suffers. Like, maybe they started as a PR agency and then added digital or added content or started as digital and then brought on like other aspects. And I have found if you have the bandwidth and the budget to maybe get 2 agencies and split up digital and PR, for example, or split, like, think about like the couple of the 2 or 3 things that are really important and you can split that up. I think you get more of a specialized focus and you get people who that's what they do. They're not trying to diversify their skill set. They're super interested in doing, those things. You have to be super organized and be willing to manage all of those relationships. And you have to have great communication. I think that has to be part of the brand's culture, is communication and treating agencies like partners if you're going to have that many relationships you're managing, because otherwise I do think something will drop. But if you can do it, I have seen more success going with, I would say, 2, in my size company, like 2 agencies who specialize in the things that are really strategic for you. I've seen at larger brands that I've been at where like I've gone in and I've said, this is too many. Like somebody told us we needed to spend a certain amount of money. And so we've gone and figured out how to spend that amount of money. And it doesn't make sense and it's not strategic. So I think you do have to find the right balance for the organization. But my experience has been that that's kind of the way that I would go.
Sure. I also find it's not, I have no data or science to back this up, but more qualitative, I would say. Smaller independent agencies are just hungrier and like more, from a communication standpoint, just from an inherent flexibility standpoint, it's also easier for them to be flexible. And I find like the biggest disconnect, God, we keep referencing our LinkedIn posts. We're depressingly, this sucks. We've gone
we really need a hobby.
I was going to say, I talked about it the other day though, like I think the weird part of agencies and client relationships is they start out on the wrong foot, because typically what I see is the biggest thing that a brand wants, somebody who's a CMO, VP of marketing leader, they want an inherent level of flexibility. They want to say, hey, like, we want to spend roughly this, but like, I need to be able to move things around, and I need some level of flexibility to change. And every time I call you with something, you're not a cash register isn't ringing. Agencies, on the flip side, while they say, yeah, like we'll be flexible, what they really want is the exact same scope, exact same hours every single month. Rightly so, because it's easier for them to staff, just easier for them to like do a high level of work when they know what's coming down the pipe. But it doesn't work, and there needs to be some sort of middle ground met. And I think the agencies and the brands that discuss that on the front end are usually more successful. But I feel a lot of people are like afraid to talk about that on the front end.
Yeah. And somebody asked me the other day, what's something you wish an agency knew? And I said, keep in mind, I own services, so I have a billable team. So maybe I'm coming at this from like a different perspective. But if I ask you to do something, or we scope out the next month or quarter or whatever, and it's out of scope, even by 10, 20 hours, I don't care what it is, just tell me and let me pay you. Like, I don't want... like
nobody says that, Leigh.
Well, because here's the thing. It goes back to it's a relationship and it's communication. And if I'm constantly asking you to go 10 hours over scope, then at some point you're going to get frustrated and we're going to have a conversation. But if you've never told me, I'm going to feel like that's coming out of left field, right? Yeah. So I just want, and even if, an agency comes to me and says, hey, you know what? We've been a partner for 2 years. I just want you to know this is about 10 hours out of scope, whatever it is. It's out of scope. We're going to do it this time. But just so your expectation is that next time, if the project is this large, we are going to have to go back and get another statement of work or get another PO or whatever. I would much rather someone say that to me than just eat it over and over. And then next thing you know, like they're super frustrated with us and we have no idea why.
Would you like my unpopular opinion to that question of being on the other side of the agency?
Yeah, I would love it.
It's such a nuance. Like, I think that's what makes account people and agency people who are just dealing in client services the best. Because there's that nuance of bringing it up without sounding like you're just, there to charge them, even though you kind of are, because again, it's a business. But you want to maintain the relationship. If in a perfect world, I would love that to come from you. To say, not like you're dying to be charged more, but to say like, hey, like, it looks like we're going over, like, I know this is the first time or something like that. Like, if this becomes consistent, let's chat about it and like figure out the way to do it, which again, in a perfect world from your side, like you just said, the agency would bring that up. I think the takeaway from both is like the most important thing is knowing your customer and knowing who you are talking to and what they want. I can vividly remember towards the end of my tenure at my agency, I think the words were, if Danny brings up price again, we're done, or something like that, or us going out of scope, we're done. And I was like, well, what am I supposed to do? Because everything is out of scope. Like, we've never talked about any of these things, which that's the more like egregious, end of the spectrum. But yeah, it's definitely a song and dance. I'm with you. I think it should be brought up as early as humanly possible. Because again, what you don't want is if you, ask to like renew and they're like, oh, the price is double. You're like, what? Why is it double?
Or you're like, have you guys been sitting around in the break room complaining about what a horrible customer we are? And I thought that everything was great, because that sounds not fun on my side either, right?
At some point, everybody at an agency is complaining about something. So
fair enough.
Probably. I'd be surprised if you were the least favorite customer, though you're super fun to deal with. So you can't be their least favorite.
There you go. I'd like to stay in the middle. Right?
Yeah. You want to be Switzerland, very neutral like me. Yeah. On the positive side, we'll do the positive first. Can you think of a really great agency experience that you've had in the past and what made it so great? More the, communication and relationship stuff, the work that we discussed. What was it for you?
Yeah, I think it was this agency knew probably my business, and not just the business and the market. Like, they knew that really, really well. You could tell they had gone out and not just relied on us to provide them with education and research and enablement, but they had gone out and done a ton of research on the market and our competitors. And
at times, your son?
What?
Before you were engaged, your son?
Definitely. They had done some research before we were engaged, but then as we got going, it was clear, like, I'd say things like, oh, competitors, and they go, oh, and that's X, Y, and Z. Like, it was like, they were ready. They knew it. And ongoing, as things were going on, like, they're sending us articles about things that are happening that, like, my product marketing person hadn't even found yet. Or hadn't shared yet. So they knew the market, but they also knew the business really well. So in this situation, I had marketing managers that were responsible for different lines of business. And we had a very, I would say, account-based marketing focus at this organization. And so it was expected that if the head of sales came by and said, hey, what's going on with X prospect, that marketing manager could pull it up and say, this is where they've gone, this is what they've done, here's who we're talking to, these are the campaigns they're in, and almost build that customer journey off the top of their head, right? Because we had, call it 10 target accounts. I mean, that's also just when you think about a marketing manager, yes, that's super important, but also, they're running campaigns, they're putting together events, they're doing a lot of other things too. And there would be times that we would email the agency and say, hey, can you send me the customer journey on X prospect? And we would get an email back in 15 minutes, boom, here's where it is. Here are the people. They knew our funnel, like I said, almost better than the marketing managers did, which was, you could debate good or bad, but it took mind share and bandwidth off of my marketing managers and freed them up to do the things that the agency couldn't do, like internal management and things like that. So just the fact that they were willing to know where they could add value that was more, I would say, soft skill value, not in scope, unfortunately, but they were finding ways to continue to add value and understood where we had gaps. And I never asked them to do that. They just said, hey, we feel like there's some gaps in reporting. We're going to build that out because we want to make sure that we're continuously adding value. Can we meet with your ops team? We want to understand how we can, pull in the data, and just continually innovating and wanting to get involved in the business and wanting to understand and ingrain themselves in our business. I don't think I ever, and this is contradictory to what we just said, but I don't think I ever had a negative conversation about scope or pricing or, there were times where they would come to us maybe and say, hey, we feel like we should do X, Y, and Z. That means that A, B, and C might fall, but I really feel like that's more strategic for you. So I'm recommending we change scope and just do this instead. It's okay. I mean, it's a super easy conversation, right? So, I mean, that was hands down the best agency relationship I've ever had, because it was the younger, scrappy agency situation like you just talked about, where they just wanted to make sure they were a true partner and doing a great job for our business.
Yeah, and truthfully, I don't even think it's bad to say, if you're a younger, newer agency or scrappier, presumably your account means more financially as well, and rightly so that they do those sorts of things. So that's great to hear. It's what you said at the end about they redid the scope a little to make it. You just said, yeah, sure. That's important too, making things easy to say yes in sales in general, I would say, but especially for agency stuff. We talked about that all the time. What can we do just to make it so easy for them to just say yes? That there's not really any other option. Why wouldn't they say yes? And sometimes that's easier said than done. But I'd say overall in sales in general, people complicate stuff so much where there's so many different options and nuance. Give them a way to say yes right then, even if it's something smaller than you want to do. Money in motion stays in motion, all that sort of stuff.
And if you know their business, that's so much easier to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's also harder to fire you if you're more deeply ingratiated in the business as well.
Yes, it is.
Let's talk some shit now, Leigh.
Yes.
On the flip side, negative agency experience, which I'm sure you've had, and what made it so negative?
Yeah, this one was much earlier in my career. We hired one of the agencies that you never get fired for hiring. And
the IBM conundrum.
Yes. And there were a lot of reasons for why we did it, probably internal political reasons and things like that. And it was, every time we turned to her, every single month, oh, scope's got to increase. Oh, we're not getting the results, so your budget needs to increase. And let me tell you, we weren't spending a little bit of money, because you can't hire one of those agencies and spend a little bit of money, right? It just got to the point where in the beginning, the global leadership was so on board with this relationship because it was a big name and they were going to do great things for us. And it became very, I call it they were the ta-da agency, where they would go off in a corner, put together campaigns, put together stuff, not want to talk to us about it. And then we'd show up to a meeting and they'd ta-da, here's what we did for you. And you're going, we didn't ask for any of that. It's not on message. It's not aligned with our strategy. Why? And now I have to pay you for that. And it was just, it was so misaligned and there was such a lack of communication. And it was one of my only experiences dealing with an agency of that size, but it felt very much just corporate. Like, we're going to go, the expectation is we go do the work and we present it out to you, and then you're going to be very happy about what we did because we're all super smart. So clearly you're going to trust that we know what we're doing. And it just didn't feel like a partnership. It felt very disconnected, and we spent a ton of money and eventually just totally cut off that relationship and brought everything in-house because the larger powers that be had lost all faith in external agencies. Because if the big name can't do it right, then like how could anybody else, is kind of how it played out internally. And my internal team ended up having to take everything on. And it was a bad situation, I think, for everybody involved.
It's funny that you brought up an agency that you don't get fired for hiring, essentially. I'm actually helping currently a quote unquote big brand. And one of the agencies that I presented, I was like, hey, like, I don't think that it was like, they're definitely capable and qualified, but like, they're doing some like out of bounds shit, like this is an agency that you'd probably like, again, I wouldn't recommend anybody I didn't think was wildly capable, but like you'd have to sell this internally. And the quote I got from them after was like, you were totally right. I think they are the future. I don't think I could like hire them without fearing for my job. Like, I think my bosses may like be like, what is going on over there? Like, that's too risky. And
wow.
To your point, like, I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. Like, there's pros and cons, but like sometimes it is the right decision, even if it goes south, I think, to hire like the safe answer. I tell that to agencies a lot too, like knowing your audience is important. Like sometimes some brands aren't ready for cool stuff, or nor do they need it. And the people on the other side are people as well, trying to keep their jobs, all that sort of stuff. I think LinkedIn, not to keep bringing up LinkedIn, changed it as well. Like you have all of these people, agencies, vendors who are great at content. And it kind of gives you like that false sense of security, a little like, oh, well, if they're so good at content and I'm seeing them and they seem smart, they're like, surely like they're wonderful practitioners at what they're doing and all of that sort of stuff. It's just not the case, sadly. There's several agencies and vendors I've heard. Again, I know there's two sides to every story, but like just being that agency that like people talk about, oh, you got to hire them and stuff like that, does not equate to a good working relationship for everyone. It's kind of why the tagline I've been using is finding an agency is easy, finding the right agency is hard. And I think that's kind of like one of the reasons for it. Social media has made everybody a celebrity.
I totally agree. I think you hit the nail on the head. Some brands, not only do they not want to, but they shouldn't be innovative, right? Like depending on the market that you're in, depending on your buyer. Yeah, it's great. I'm in supply chain. There's a supply chain company who they use shock in their advertising. I mean, it reminds me of some of the Silicon Valley advertising that I feel like we were seeing 10 years ago, where people were like throwing F-bombs in there and every time I see it, like, so they're on these small, like niche trade show floors with these banners. And every time I see it, I just think, I don't know that you know your audience. Like it stops. I remember the brand, don't get me wrong, but supply chain's a pretty old school market. It's becoming the whole joke in supply chain is like, it's become sexy again. I'm like, I mean, it's become talked about, like for sure. But, if an agency came to me and pitched something that was totally just wildly out of line with where I think the market is prepared for, how the people in the market talk and things like that, that would be such a turnoff for me, because it would just tell me that they care way more about big, flashy, bold campaigns than they do about like actually understanding the market and driving results, whether it looks and feels cool or not.
Sure. Do you think that negative agency experience can be, it sounds like the one that you described, probably not, but like overall, do you think a negative agency experience can be salvaged?
I'm going to sound like a broken record. I mean, I think it goes back to communication. Like, do you have a person at the agency? Normally, I feel like there's one person who, like, the brand relationship owner has, that you can pick up the phone and just say, can we just have an open conversation? Because we are super sideways and I don't want to start over. Hopefully you don't want to lose our business, but if you do, like, that's fine too. But can we just have a conversation about what's going on here? And if you can do that, I mean, it's like any other relationship. Like, if you can have that conversation and you can get it back to a good place. And I've had instances with agencies that I've had for years at a time, and like you get the wrong account manager because somebody left and they put the junior person in there. And like I've had to pick up the phone and just say, I hate to tell you this, but like we're not super happy and I'm going to give it 3 months and here are the things that I need to change. And but you've got to be willing to have that conversation. And if not, then you're going to be churning through agencies every 6 to 12 months and you're never going to get any traction because no relationship's going to be perfect. And if you're not willing to communicate and have a conversation about it, then I don't see how you can have longevity and have a true partner.
I'm starting to think it's the way I answer. I'm hoping it's a trend. I'm starting to think it's the way I ask the question. Not a single person, when we talk about negative agency experiences, have referenced the actual work. It's always communication, misaligned expectations. There have been mentions of like, sometimes you don't get like the greatest work. But again, like most of the people have said, like, I would take mediocre-ish work. Like, again, everybody wants like perfection, but it's more speed. Like I want fast and mediocre over slow and perfect. Like,
interesting. Do you think that is because you're working with brands that are more startup minded and they just expect fast?
I work with brands of all shapes and sizes lately. I find brands that are bigger or slower themselves. It depends. Like I guess I can announce it here since I'm interviewing them. Like I helped Yamaha recently.
Oh, cool.
A brand like that, I think, when you start talking about things like that like you mentioned to most people and they've heard of, there's a different expectation for work. And I would say rightly so. It's going to be more widely viewed potentially. I just helped Hitachi as well. Like same type of deal. If you're Hitachi, like you're a global, brand, there's more ramifications if work sucks. For a mid-tier company, a lot of these things, I think it's just you have to get stuff out in the market. And again, like it needs to make your life easier. If you need to build a website, for example, you don't want the website to look like shit, 100%. You want it to look gorgeous. You want to get everything you want. But again, like you can always iterate down the road. So to get something that's a good, like even in my old agency, we did a lot of big website work. Like we did the Waffle House website, which was many, many years of work, truthfully. At the end of the big, long projects, I don't think anybody, like where it was super happy at the end, anybody was like, wow, this website is so gorgeous. It was like, oh my God, thank you for getting us through this obscene process. Like, can we go have a drink? It wasn't like, wow, that nutrition calculator is incredible. Like nobody references that. It's more like, did I make your life easier? Like, yeah, like when that thing happened and I called you Friday at 5:00 and you answered, you saved my weekend, stuff like that. So I think it's more the person I'm dealing with depends on their expectation, but no, it's just very rare. Even the few conversations where people have mentioned it, it's like you can correct bad work. You can get feedback and say like, oh, this wasn't on brand because of X, Y, and Z. And of course, if it happens way down the road, that sucks. Somewhat to be expected, at the beginning, but it's really hard to correct just a bad relationship once that seed of doubt has been sowed, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
What you talked about, that your industry is sexy again, which is interesting to hear. Let's go with that. What are you most bullish on in marketing in general? I assume we're not going to see Longbow doing TikTok dances anytime soon, but we've got NFTs, we've got the metaverse, we've got in-person events, I presume are like fully-ish back. What are you most excited about?
But you won't see me doing TikTok dances because I don't even
Not yet,
have
Leigh.
TikTok.
Don't say never.
I don't even have TikTok. But if my team said they wanted to do it, I feel like there's probably a void in supply chain on TikTok. Maybe we could take it over. I'd be totally open to that.
You're going to get 20 TikTok agencies sending you LinkedIn messages once this is released.
Don't message me. I will message you. But I think there's a few things. In-person events have been awesome for us. We started back in the spring of this year and hit them super hard. My team was on the road for about 3 months straight. Bless them. And they were wonderful for us. I think people are excited to be back in person, just talking to people. It's been awesome to see that. I'm sure you hear that all the time. I'll go back to community. There is, and it depends, you don't have to define, I mean, it doesn't have to be, maybe it is structured, maybe it isn't. I think you figure out how you define community, but for us, it's customers and really building around our customers. We launched a customer advisory board. We're going to do some we had our first customer advisory board meeting with our user conference 2 weeks ago. So we're going to do some cool stuff around like building that out and really, I think, empowering our customers to get to know each other better, because that's where we see like the sauce kind of really, really gets made. And then I think it's when you think about marketing, I am very bullish on that should be synonymous with the customer. And I probably get in trouble with my sales team all the time on this, but like to an extent, I don't give a shit about net new revenue generation from a marketing perspective.
Now we're talking.
Like,
I'll make sure they clip this for sure.
Yeah, send it to my sales team. No, I mean it's important, right? But if you're doing all of the things that marketing should be doing, then that should kind of take care of itself. Is my philosophy on net new revenue generation. If you're putting out great content, if you're empowering your customers, if you're creating word of mouth, if you're taking care of your customers, if you're expanding customer revenue, if you're doing all of these other things, if you're showing up at events, if you've got great PR engine, if you're working with analysts, which I know people are like shitting on analysts recently, but like I will truly believe if you're doing all of the things that marketing should be doing, and which most 50% of that should be centered on understanding and empowering customers, then net new revenue generation will take care of itself. And you can do ABM, whatever that strategy is. Like you can do net new ABM so much easier if you're doing all of the other stuff. So I am bullish on seeing this pendulum with marketing swing from owning a net new pipeline or revenue number to just having a seat at the strategy table. And I say strategy, not revenue, because I think it does come back to revenue, right? When you're talking about customer retention and expansion and those sorts of things, but it's just overall business strategy, and marketing has got to be looked at outside of just this stupid HubSpot funnel that we put ourselves in.
I 1000% agree. The only thing I think that, again, not to be a pessimist, that I think it just won't get there is because, and I'll use myself as an example, what you just described makes 1,000,000% sense. Every company should do it. However, you can only do it if you think long-term versus short-term.
Yes.
Long-term wins and sustainability and, just being consistent, truthfully. Myself as an example, I can inherently just do things differently thinking long-term because I don't have a board. I don't have employees. I can do these things. This podcast is an example of this. I'm giving it, a year, and I'll probably do it more to like see what happens. And I, don't have like KPIs on it, so to speak. But like when you get into investors and things like that, like even when I see like salespeople doing shitty sales things that we talked about, somebody's making them do it to reach some arbitrary-ish number. I know numbers matter, but like if you think long-term, yeah, a lot of these things do. But when you think in terms of the quarter and, the end of a fiscal year and stuff like that, it's just really impossible, I think, to have the best, truly, truly, truly best interest of the company in mind when you're trying to hit these metrics. And again, like, I know it's different because I talked to my brother a ton who's at a big sales organization, but if you don't hit a number on, the end of the quarter and it hits the next day, the fact that like drastically shifts, numbers and expectations and, all of it, I'm like, that's insanity, and if you take that away, I think most businesses are better off.
I agree. And, I say I was on my soapbox, but I can say it because we're not VC funded, we're not PE funded. So I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm in, a nice situation where I work for a super reasonable founder who has longevity as his goal. I'm curious if there's any, like, would you have advice for people who want, like, maybe you can't go all the way that way, right? If you have guidance that you've got to meet and things like that. But like, do you think there's a way that we can somehow 5 years from now look back and like we've at least met in the middle somewhere?
Leigh, you're ready for a podcast. You're already asking me questions. Yeah, I think you have to think in terms of doing things. So when people talk to me a lot during the context of finding agencies, everything's based on needs, timeline, and budget. And some people often come with like, we want to do this for 3 months. And 100% of people I talk to say the same thing. If it's successful, we'll spend more and keep doing it. I'm like, yeah, no shit, of course. Why wouldn't you? If everything's successful, we'd all be, billionaires. My pushback to that is, if that's the case, what can you spend for a year? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, because I would rather see a full season. I would, if you do something for a short period of time, anything, in my opinion, you can't say with a reasonable level of certainty if it was successful, if it was actually successful, because it didn't run long enough. And conversely, if it didn't, do so well, if it was actually not successful. So I think it's important to think and work backwards from like, what can you theoretically spend if it ends up returning nothing is like some tip. I'd probably say it like 20 times a day on every call I'm on with marketers of everything I say is easier said when it's not my own money. I'm like, yeah, let's spend $10 million. It sounds awesome. Like, let's do it tomorrow.
Sounds exciting. Would love to do that. Yeah.
To your point, it's communication. I really think, and again, easier said than done. It's honest conversations. Like, I think I just saw in Pavilion, actually, what was it? 62%, I want to say. I could have that wrong. A massive number of sales teams missed their numbers, and is it over forecasting and stuff? I think like we get so obsessed with numbers, especially in marketing. And if you get so obsessed with the numbers, you'll never try certain things.
Yes.
And B, you just stop too soon. So like, I want to see consistency and sustained efforts. So the short answer to that is that whatever you have to do things for like, at a minimum 9 months, but really like, what are you doing for a year to give it the old college try before you pull the plug, essentially?
Yes, totally. I've worked with so many people who are afraid to spend, afraid to test, afraid to keep spending and justify spend because of what you just said. And I think it shoots so many companies in the foot.
It makes sense that they lose their job at a lot of places. So that's what I'm saying. Like you said, You're lucky that you have a founder who gets it and stuff like that. If I was at a company and I had a founder who did not get it, and they made these blanket statements and I pushed back, if I'm doing something crazy and it doesn't work, well, I'm probably getting fired. So I respect it. I think it's more like, I'm so like consistency. Truthfully, it beats out everything. Like you just find out so much more. You have to do things for a sustained amount of time.
Yeah.
What keeps you up at night from a marketing or business standpoint?
I think right now probably the same sorts of things that keep other people up. We're a stable company, so I'm not, we haven't taken on funding. We're not going through a lot of the constriction that other companies have been going through, thankfully. But, we do have a lot of global Fortune 100, Fortune 500 brands who are optimizing their supply chain. So it's great for us because they're still kind of in this digital transformation that they will be going through for the next 5 years as a result of the pandemic, which is awesome. But are there going to be spending freezes? These are companies that have shareholders that they're responsible for, and supply chain projects are not known to be cheap. So how is the market going to balance creating I would say, flexible supply chain and creating, going through these digital transformations in supply chain with inflation and what's going on in the market and things like that, and the responsibility that they rightly so have to their shareholders. So I think just keeping a really close eye on the market and being there to support our customers and understanding if projects need to shift and having flexibility and things like that is really what we're focused on right now. But, other than that, there's not a lot that keeps me up at night. There's no such thing as a marketing emergency, Danny. Like, we're in a good spot.
You'd be surprised at the faux emergencies I've dealt with in my career. I believe as well. There's one marketing emergency, I think. If you're like a massive e-commerce retailer, like your site's down or something like that, I'll put that in the emergency category. Outside of that, I can't think of any.
I said that. I took a week off in August. I was burnt out. Like Kaylee, I was just burnt out. And I said, I'm going to take a week off and do absolutely nothing. Don't call me. And I said, the only marketing emergency is if the website goes down. What do you think happened?
The website went down, Leigh?
My digital marketing person was like, you realize I hold you personally responsible for this situation, right? Like, that's fair. I somewhat manifested this.
I'm going to the Dominican Republic tomorrow to hopefully relax because I'm slightly burnt out as well. Were you able to unplug?
Oh, yeah. I didn't go anywhere or do anything. I just read really trashy books and spent a lot of time outside.
That'll be the next podcast.
Yeah.
That is the final marketing question we have for you. I have 3 final ones for you in a non-marketing related. What was your very first job growing up?
I worked...
If you worked growing up.
I did. Gail and Buddy had me working at 15.
Love it.
I worked in the kids' daycare room at a Ladies Workout Express, which,
Okay.
if you think about that demographic, everyone coming in that gym had at least one, if not multiple children. And there were times that I would have like 15 kids under 4. And I mean, it was pretty awful.
Did it prepare you at all for what you're doing now?
I will say I learned what I don't want to do.
I was just trying to remember who said it. It was either the last podcast or the one before. I can't remember what the job was, but they were like, yeah, it showed me exactly what I never wanted to do in my life.
Yeah. Teacher, not like, I don't have, not it for me. So yeah.
Fair.
Yeah.
What is your final meal if you had to pick?
Pizza.
From?
Oh, see, that's hard because they're all different. I would say more of a New York style pizza, and I just want cheese. Like, you don't need to make it.
What are you, Kevin McAllister from Home Alone? Cheese pizza just for you?
I would sit down and eat a full cheese pizza out of the box. Just no shame whatsoever.
That's my takeaway from this. How do you get to the C-suite? Only cheese, straight to the point. And then the final question, who is somebody who inspires you personally, professionally, or both?
So I will say, like, this is a broad answer. Maybe it's a cop-out, but I will say founders of like all company types and sizes. So Danny, like people like you, people like
what a kiss ass, Leigh. You're already on my board. You don't have to say that.
Well, hey, it's the truth. I mean, I think that it's something that a lot of people talk about they want to do. Like, oh, I've got this great idea, or I've got a mediocre idea. It doesn't even matter. Your idea was great. Like, I could go out and I could totally do this on my own. And I think it takes a lot of guts to make that decision to go and just do your thing. And I mean, we've talked about how hard it can be to set your own personal boundaries and things like that. And so I think that knowing what it takes to probably take those first, call it like 5 steps to just like get going on your own and not have a safety net is the scariest thing that I think I could ever do in my life. And so I just really respect people who have done that and then continue to persevere through the times that it's not at all fun, because it sounds great. But I also know, talking with founders, that it's a lot of times not great. That there's like super high highs and super low lows. And so I think anyone who can do that to create the life that they want is awesome. So yeah, people like you really are the people that I look up to, that I think are doing it right.
Thank you. It is simultaneously the healthiest and unhealthiest thing I have ever done in my life, I would say. But to your point, like you're saying, like people who take that step, it took a global pandemic for me to take that step. So I don't know what, if there wasn't COVID, I think I'd still be at my old agency. I have no clue, truthfully. But yeah, it was 100% the kick in the ass I needed. And the reason I say it was like the best thing that ever happened to me, outside of course, the terrible things of COVID, was when I was interviewing for jobs, because I resigned with nothing, it felt riskier to work for someone else at that point, truthfully. Like the interviews I was having, rightly so, because 2020 was the weirdest year of anyone's life, were just like bizarre. It was like, yeah, there's like a pandemic, like we can hire you, but like we don't really know what to, nobody knew anything. So like I was like, huh? Like how's no one know anything? Like, all right, I'll just dip my toes in and see if this works. So it was kind of like the perfect storm. But yeah, I mean, the biggest tip I would say to anybody even like considering it is like, just fucking do it. Which is again easier said than done. But like if you dip your toes in and don't go all in, it's hard to know if it'll actually work, I think. Like, it took me going all in to, like, be like, oh, like, this is actually, like, a business that could, like, do this for, like, my life rather than just, like, making a couple bucks.
And it clicked really quickly for you. I mean, in terms of, like, there was clearly a market. Let me
100%. I also, not to put down what I've done, I joked that I was unintentionally building it for like a decade and didn't realize it. Like I had a head start being at an agency, a spoke agency, and like I didn't realize how many people like I knew, and the fact that I'm free to brands is helpful as well. But no, I mean, it's definitely nice that it clicked. I didn't have really like that scary oh shit month where I was like, oh my God, like $0, I didn't make a lot at all at the very beginning, but enough to like pay my mortgage, which was literally the goal. I was like, if I can pay my mortgage and my bills, like, and eat, like that's what I need, basic things taken care of. But Yeah, I feel very, very fortunate, and I can't believe it took a global catastrophe to do it.
Hey, there's been a lot of horrible things that came out of COVID, obviously, but I think there are a lot of good things that came out of it too. Like things like people just allowing themselves to change their own expectation for the way they're going to live. So I'm all for that.
I'm with you, Leigh. This was awesome. Thank you so much for joining. And I know this isn't going to air for like another week, but you better be at that board dinner or else. So
absolutely. Thanks for having me. This has been fun. I am now. Awesome. I feel like I need to start my own podcast and just bitch about revenue generation.
100%. Call it that.
Bitching about revenue generation.
Can't think of a better. I like a punny, obvious name. My company's called You Should Talk To. I'm with you.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
all right.
Thanks.
I will talk to you soon, Leigh.
All right.
Thank you for checking out this episode of You Should Talk To. This show is brought to you by the company with the same name, You Should Talk To, a company that helps marketing leaders find the right agency or freelancer for their situation. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow You Should Talk To wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit YouShouldTalkTo.com for more information.